Hi, I'm Gregory Dell, joined by attorney Rachel Alters, and we're going to talk today about neurological disorders and how to get your long-term disability insurance claim approved if you have a neurological disorder. So, Rachel, when we say neurological disorders, there is an entire gamut of medical conditions that fall under that category, whether it's Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, a traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, the whole gamut of the neurological disorders. And you and I and our team of lawyers have dealt with all of these conditions. And the common theme amongst all of these conditions that you know is that the disability carriers, they almost never dispute the diagnosis, the fact that a person has this condition. But what claimants need to understand that the fact that you have this diagnosis does not mean that you're automatically going to be eligible for disability benefits. And most claimants know that, but they don't understand the extent of that because of the fact that most claimants who get a diagnosis with a neurological disorder, other than those who have obviously a traumatic brain injury that happens from an accident, they've been dealing with the condition for oftentimes years before they reach the point that they're unable to continue working. So in this video, I want to give some people some tips about how to put themselves in the best position to get approved, whether they're just considering applying now or they've been denied. And I want to talk about some of the common scenarios that we see in these claims that will help people to, again, put themselves in the best position to get approved. So to start out, Rachel, when a person calls you and they say, I have a neurological disorder, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you have to make a determination as to how you're going to prove their eligibility for benefits?
Yes, Greg, a lot of my clients have neurological disorders. So when I get the phone call from a claimant who has one of these neurological disorders, such as multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's, the first thing I ask them is, who are you treating with? Because it's extremely important for a disability claim in order to get approved that you are treating with a specialist that specializes in your disabling condition. And oftentimes, even if somebody has been diagnosed with MS, they're not always following closely with their neurologist. So that, to me, is one of the most important things, is that they're being treated on a regular basis. Oftentimes I'll tell them, at least every 2 to 3 months to follow up with the neurologist, tell them exactly what is going on with you. And specifically, if your symptoms are getting worse, that needs to be documented in the medical records. Because if it's not documented, it doesn't happen, hasn't occurred, and it doesn't exist. So the insurance carriers are going to look for the medical records to show and to indicate that not only do you have this condition, the diagnosis was made, but that your condition has progressed to the point where you're no longer able to work. And oftentimes I'll get a denial letter from a carrier where they'll specifically say, yes, we do agree that this, multiple sclerosis was diagnosed and that diagnosis is accurate. However, we do not believe that we see the restrictions and limitations are as severe as they need to be in order to state that the claimant can't perform the material substantial duties of their occupation. So that's very, very important to make sure that the medical record indicates how severe the condition is and that it has progressed. Because when somebody has worked for as long as they have, let's say you've worked with this condition for approximately 2 years, they're going to say, well, okay, they've been working with this condition for 2 years. What's changed? If they've been able to work this whole time, they should still be able to continue. So it's extremely important for that claimant to sit down with their doctor, talk to them openly and honestly about everything that's going on at work, if they're having performance issues, if their symptoms are worsening. It all has to be in the medical records, because just having a doctor write a letter isn't enough for an insurance carrier to approve the benefit.
And Rachel, in all of the claims we deal with neurological disorders, there's always a physical component to it, but there's also what I call a mental and a cognitive component to it. And we try to make the disability carriers understand, in the way in which we end up advocating for our clients, that this is not all about the person's ability to sit for 6 hours a day or get up and take a break every 5 minutes or be able to, stand for an hour a day or walk 2 hours in the day. That this is a human being who has neurological limitations that affects them in many different ways, and it's not always just pain. It could be, it could be fatigue, it could be short-term memory, it could be difficulty focusing. And those are real issues that at the end of the day, it's often more the cognitive difficulties than the physical limitations, especially when a lot of the jobs more often than not are of a sedentary type job, which means it's more like a desk job as opposed to, it's not like someone's working in a factory who has Parkinson's and they have to do fine motor skills with their hands. That's a different type of claim when the physical. But for a vast majority of the claims, because more than 65–70% of the jobs in America are sedentary type jobs, it's the cognitive difficulties that prevent the person from being able to work with reasonable continuity and do their job. So how do you help your claimants to prove that their cognitive limitations is what's preventing them from being able to do their job or any occupation?
And that's a difficult thing to prove sometimes because a lot of those things are subjective. There are a few types of objective tests that can show that a person is having cognitive issues with their executive functioning and their memory. Something called a neuropsych evaluation can be done. They are costly and they do take a long time. It's usually a 2-day test. And oftentimes this will show that somebody has limitations in their executive functioning, their memory, their skills to retain information. Another test that can be done by a neurologist is a mini mental nervous test. They can test to see if there's memory issues. This is something a little less invasive and a little less timely. But it's very difficult unless the claimant is expressing to their physician on a regular basis the issues that they're having with their memory and their ability to focus. That's a big thing. And if you're in a job that requires extreme concentration and you are unable to do that, you're not going to be effective in your position. So many times people with these neurocognitive disorders, they're either in pain, which is causing them to not be able to focus, or they have issues with their, the structure of their brain that's causing their inability to focus, such as, somebody who has Parkinson's or somebody who has MS, they fatigue very easily, and a lot of times they have, they need to nap for a significant period of time during the day, which can interfere in an ability to perform a job. So a lot of these things, it's really important for the claimant to voice to their doctor and maybe even, keep a diary of all the times, that they were having issues with cognitive issues, because sometimes it's hard to document. There's not necessarily a test that will show that the cognitive issues exist other than, the self-report or the patient report to the doctor. An MRI can be done of the brain. Oftentimes it can show, when somebody has MS, there can be lesions on the brain that can be objective proof of issues that they're having, but sometimes the MRIs come up negative, they don't show anything. So it's extremely important for the patient to communicate very specifically with their treating physicians.
And Rachel, at the end of the day, with a lot of these and almost all of the neurological conditions, it comes down to the subjective complaints, and there's no, we talked about the neuropsych testing that you just said that can be considered quasi-objective evidence, although there's still subjective input in the test because you're the human doing the test and there's a human taking the test results. So there is some subjective input in that test because there's no machine that could affirmatively tell somebody whether or not they actually have the pain or discomfort or the fatigue. Obviously, the MRIs and scans of the brain are strong objective evidence, but even that is not necessarily going to tell exactly what your functional limitations would be. So it comes down to the credibility of the claimant and whether or not the disability company should believe them. Can you talk about what tools are the disability company going to try to use to discredit the claimant's complaints?
Well, usually the first thing they do is they'll retain a physician in the same specialty that your doctor is, who is asserting that you are unable to work due to your restrictions and limitations. So if you have a neurologist that filled out an attending physician form, they're going to hire a peer review physician to review the form, to review all your medical records, and to render an opinion that you're no longer disabled or you weren't disabled to begin with. My clients always will say to me, well, how is it that I've been treating with my neurologist who sees me in person, who knows me, who claims that due to my restrictions and limitations because of my diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, they know me best. And this person who's never met me, they've never even talked to me, has reviewed my medical records and disagrees with my doctor. How can that be allowed? And unfortunately, this is allowed, and this is one of the most popular ways of denying claims, is to say, well, our peer review physician, who is highly qualified, disagrees with your treating doctor, therefore you're not disabled. And that, unfortunately, this is how claims, get denied most of the time.
And then the other tools that they're going to use to challenge the credibility, other than, of course, the peer review or doing a physical examination, which they call an independent medical exam, which is really a compulsory medical exam, which is anything but independent. And we have lots of videos available in terms of how to prepare yourself for these independent medical exams. But they're going to use video surveillance, where they're going to try to follow the claimant around and see what they're doing in their daily lives and try to find some kind of inconsistency between what the claimant told them in a statement or what's documented in the medical records. They're also going to scan all of the social media. They're going to look and see if you're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. Do you have a blog? They're going to just try to find anything they can about you on social media, and they're going to try to find an inconsistency. So that's the other tool, which is used extensively by the disability carriers, and probably one of the behind the internal physician reports and exams that they do, the reason why we see these claims denied. So, there's lots of things we can talk about with the neurological disorders, and probably do an hour video on each of the neurological conditions. And we've handled thousands of these claims against all of the companies for neurological conditions. What we'd like to offer is for a free initial consultation for you to reach out to us, whether you're applying for benefits or your claim's been denied. We simply ask you to call us. We'll ask you to email us a copy of your denial letter or a copy of your policy. Whether it's Rachel, myself, or any of our attorneys, we'll immediately review that and let you know immediately how we can help you. We help clients all over the country, so no matter where you live, we're able and happy to work with you. We encourage you to go through our website, search your company, search your medical condition, search your occupation. We have an incredible amount of information that's all original content that we've put together. And the reason we do this is we want you to be aware about what this process is about. We want you to know how a disability insurance company thinks. And we know that if you have a little bit more education and knowledge, that you're going to be in the best position possible to get your benefits paid. And that's important to us, and we find that it's very helpful throughout this process. So we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you, and we'll be here should you need us in the future. Thank you.